Greetings and welcome. In this video, we will be discussing 4 views of human nature as put forward in the Neo-Confucian tradition of Chinese philosophy. So to begin with, if you're not familiar with the term Neo-Confucian, it refers to the Chinese philosopher Confucius, who is to this day one of the most well-known and influential philosophers in all of Chinese philosophy, with his philosophy even going on at one point to become the imperial philosophy of China. Confucius wrote on a wide range of topics. However, one topic he never covered in his writings was the topic of the question of human nature. That is, whether human nature is good or bad, or perhaps neither, or maybe both, innately. On account of him never writing about this, it led all of those philosophers who followed in his tradition to debate amongst themselves, theorize amongst themselves, what the true nature may be. So today we'll be exploring 4 of the possibilities that came about from the discussions between those philosophers. And we begin with Mencius. Mencius was regarded as the second sage following from Confucius. He's regarded as the father of the theory of the original good of human beings. Human beings' natural inclination, he believed, is toward good, although human nature can be corrupted. Before we go any further, what is good, or what is goodness to Mencius? Goodness for Mencius is composed of 4 factors, each of which is naturally occurring in human beings. The first of which he calls humanity, which is the natural sympathy or sorrow we feel for the misfortunes of others. The second is righteousness, which is the natural shame and dislike that arises within us at perceptions of wrongdoing in ourselves or in others. The third is propriety, which is the deep respect that emerges in us for others whom we admire and so on. The last of which is wisdom, which he believes is our innate knowledge of what is right and what is wrong. So the argument of Mencius largely hinges on the fact that he believes goodness to be these 4 things, and that he believes these 4 things or 4 factors to be naturally occurring within human beings without learning or teaching or anything of that nature. However, of course, these things can later be taught or reinforced culturally. So Mencius goes on to make the following argument. If a trait emerges naturally from some entity, then that trait was always or is originally within it. If the traits of goodness arise naturally from human beings, then the traits of goodness are originally within human beings. The traits of goodness do arise naturally from human beings, and therefore goodness was always originally within human beings. This argument obviously brings up the question, if human beings are inherently or innately good, then why do bad people exist? Or how do people become bad? How do people lose, apparently, their original goodness? Mencius believes that we lose our good from the disconnect between nature and nurture. That is, that people will reap what they sow regardless of what they're dealt. So that is to say, if one nourishes the lower aspects of their nature, they will become evil or bad. If one nourishes the higher aspects of their nature, they will become good. He believes that those who nurture the lower are led astray by material pleasures and conditions, and their own lack of thought and understanding. So from these arguments, you may be led to believe that Mencius only looks at what's in our own control in a kind of stoic way. That is, that we are the fundamental center, the fundamental reason for why we become good or bad. And in some sense that is true, but in some other sense that is somewhat false for Mencius. This is evidenced by something called the New Mountain analogy. So let us briefly read through that together, as I believe it would be more fruitful than me just summarizing it for you. Mencius said, "The trees of the New Mountain were once beautiful, but can the mountain be regarded any longer as beautiful since, being in the borders of a big state, the trees have been hewed down with axes and hatchets? Still, with the rest given them by the days and nights, and the nourishment provided them by the rains and dew, they were not without buds, and sprouts springing forth. But then the cattle and sheep pastured upon them once again. That is why the mountain looks so bald. When people see it so bald, they think that there was never any timber on the mountain. Is this the true nature of the mountain? Is there not also a heart of humanity and righteousness originally existing in man? The way in which he loses his originally good mind is like the way in which the trees are hewed down with axes and hatchets. As trees are cut down day after day, can a mountain retain its beauty? To be sure, the days and nights do the healing, and there is the nourishing air of the calm morning which keeps him normal in his likes and dislikes. But the effect is slight, and is disturbed and destroyed by what he does during the day. When there is a repeated disturbance, the restorative influence of night will not be sufficient to preserve it. Man becomes not so much different from the beast. People see that he acts like an animal, and think that he never had the original endowment for goodness. But is that his true character? So that more or less is the view of Mencius in a nutshell. And one rebuttal we could make at this point to Mencius is that at this stage in modern humanity, we do know that, for example, psychopaths are born bad. They are born presumably with low arousal centers in the brain, leading to poor impulse control, and other features such as lack of empathy, disregard for others, thus treating others like an object or a tool for one's own pleasures. A counter rebuttal to that rebuttal could be that those human beings who are psychopaths are not normal human beings. They are, by their very nature, defective human beings, and therefore not representative of the whole of people, but representative of biological defects in people. So now let us move on to the counterposition to the original good of human beings, as posed by Exsun Kwong. And of course, you'll have to excuse my pronunciation from this point forward, as finding the specific pronunciation of these names that are so ancient is rather difficult. Exsun Kwong was also known by some other names. He is the primary philosophical opponent to Mencius within the tradition of Neo-Confucianism. Exsun Kwong believed that human nature is naturally inclined toward evil. It can reach goodness only through effort and led by sages, teachers, and leaders. So then what does it mean for human nature to be inherently evil, or to be naturally inclined toward evil? For Exsun Kwong, the inherent evil of mankind is in their innate prioritization of self-preservation and primary desire for personal gain. They thus only truly care for themselves. Left alone, untaught, their nature would lead to aggressive greed, licentiousness, and bitter disagreements resulting in death, injury, and chaos. For those of you more familiar with modern philosophy, this probably reminds you a great deal of Thomas Hobbes, who believed that prior to the social contract, human life was nasty, cold, brutish, and short. So Exsun Kwong believes that Mencius mistakes human nature with human effort, and believes that the good comes from effort rather than nature. He claims that the effort and activity of the sages of the ages throughout history are what have brought forth ideals of the good through reason amidst the chaos of the world. He believes that the inherent evil of human beings necessitates sages, rulers, leaders, teachers, and laws to create order and balance amongst human beings' natural inclination toward evil. So that is to say, Exsun Kwong's argument is that the reason why all human civilizations, or the vast, vast majority, have laws enforced with punishments is because of the human being's natural inclination toward evil, based upon their inherent drive toward self-preservation and thus personal gain. And so, put another way, he believes that in the old times, sages, and newer times, teachers, leaders, all of these moral figures emerge from chaos or from our inherent evil to create order for us through the reason of viewing what happens when humanity or civilization acts only in their own self-interest, which is a Hobbesian, cold, brutish world that is short-lived for everyone. A further argument made by Exsun Kwong is that even still, surrounded by laws, moral leaders, prosperity, order, humans still hate and envy each other. Even when not acted out to others, the thoughts remain under the surface. So I think that is a very interesting idea, that latter part there. The idea that there is something just beneath the surface, even now in prosperous Western countries or countries that are affluent. Even still, with these laws and regulations and so on, there's still a kind of hatred or envy that lurks beneath the surface of interactions with people between people. So for example, someone serving you who is better looking than you, or you see a couple that has something that you don't have, or the riches of others. All of these things that stir up animosity in us that Exxon Kwong would argue is based on these people's, what they have being an affront to what we don't have. And this is of course driven by our inherent desire for self-preservation and personal gain, and thus hatred or envy at those who have a greater degree of personal gain than what we have. The analogy that Exxon Kwong makes for human nature is a clay pot, in the sense that the clay left alone is what it is. It inclines toward being what it is. However, it is up to the human beings to make use of the materials around them to form something functional and useful. So we take the clay and we mold it into what we wish that it would be, despite what it originally is. That is, that it has the capacity to be something over and above what it originally is. And so that more or less is the view of Exxon Kwong in a nutshell as for how human nature is originally evil, why it is originally evil, and what can be done to make it better. And so at this point, one rebuttal I can think of can be made against his view that human beings are originally evil, and that is namely acts of altruism, acts where someone will put themselves at risk to help someone else. One counter-objection to this objection could be that the majority of cases where altruism occurs is done by family members, and thus is an extension of self-preservation rather than authentic altruism. However, a counter to that would be that even if the majority of cases of altruism are familial, there are still some variety of cases where people will act in such a way as to help others that are not related to them simply for the reason of helping them and for nothing else. And so if people are originally bad, why would they do that? But then a counter to that would also be that they are taught that, right? From our morals, from our sages, our leaders. We are taught how to be good, and that the good sometimes resonates with us more so than what the bad does. Now, having discussed and posed rebuttals to two of the extreme positions within Chinese philosophy, let us now turn to explore two positions that make up more of a mean, or more of a middle ground or in between, that are very similar, although slightly different. The first of which is Cao Su. He states that human nature is indifferent to good and evil. It is its indifference that makes it malleable to become either good or evil. He believed that human nature tends toward where circumstances push it. And the analogy he uses to illuminate his point is to consider the human being as a pool of water. Whether a breach is made in the water to the east or to the west, the water will flow either to the east or the west, and we can take the east or west to be the good or the bad. So wherever breaches are made or the most influence is made is where the water will flow to. So this is a view very much centered on circumstance, on where one is pushed by how they are influenced. And the next similar but slightly different view comes from Yang Xiun. Xiun believes that human nature is a mixture of both good and evil. Its malleability means that it has the potentiality for both good and evil, and is therefore both good and evil. He believes that the one who cultivates the bad will become bad, and the one who cultivates the good will become good. So putting these two views together, we can see that Cao Su's view tends to focus more externally. That is, he believes that the result of whether a human being is good or bad will depend on where circumstances push it. Whereas Yang Xiun has more of an internal view, when he says that the one who cultivates the bad will become bad, and the one who cultivates the good will become good. So pulling this all together, I think that Cao Tzu and Yang Xiun have the most appropriate or correct answers, and I don't think that the answer is either or of their views, but rather both of their views. That is to say, if we are going to posit something about human nature that it is innately, I think it makes sense to say that it is both good and evil, and neither good nor evil. So that is to say, as both viewers state, we have the capacity for both in us. We can end up either or, depending on what we nourish and depending on where circumstances push us. However, I think an interesting position not said explicitly here in terms of the neither dimension is that we have to also remember that good and bad are measures of human beings, of course, but they're measures not only of us, but specifically of our views on things. So that is to say, it's not necessarily correct to say that there is anything that is inherently or objectively, absolutely good or bad, independent of us, if good and bad are only measures of us and our perceptions of things. So that is to say, there could be something that it is that there is absolute to be good or bad, if, for example, there is a god or some creative force in the universe which makes good or bad absolutes in the grand scheme of the universe, in the grand scheme of being. But otherwise, if good and bad are not written into the structure of the world or the universe over and above us, then they can only really be subjective values relative to us and our own perceptions. And so on that note, in our next video, we are going to be discussing moral relativism, moral absolutism, and moral dilemmas.